Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's ISTAT Rising Executives Chat. For those of you who are new and joining us for these chats, these are geared toward members with 1 to 10 years experience in our industry. This is our second line of programming that we're featuring. Our first featured speaker is Paul Gainey, Chief Risk Officer of Avalon, and Carl Griffin, CEO of Genesis. And in case you missed it, the content is available online for viewing at any time. Stay tuned to ISTAT social media platforms for more information on our next series. Before we begin, I'm going to start with a few technical items. I'd like to advise the audience of a few features we have here available for conversation. On your toolbar at the top of your screen, you'll see a chat button. This feature is open for anyone to share comments with the full audience throughout the event. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A button. This will allow you to send a question for discussion, and I will address it as the time allows. And we'll be leaving some time for Q&A at the end as well. I encourage you, please send your questions. We hopefully can address all of those. So now, the moment we've been waiting for, I'd like to first thank the ISTAT Rising Executives Committee for all of their time and efforts out of their busy days to put together this programming for us. And I'd personally like to applaud them for coming up with two speakers who, in my personal opinion, are two of the most interesting people that I've had a chance to get to know over the past years. I'm not going to go into the full bios of our participants today because only they can best tell their stories in their own words, which we'll get to. But today I'm happy to spend time with two veterans of the industry. These panelists have a deep passion and enthusiasm for everything aviation, and they've both found a way to turn that same passion and enthusiasm into success, each in their own respect. I'd like to introduce Jep Thornton, who currently acts as managing partner of Aerolease Aviation. Hi, Jep. And I'd like to introduce Thomas Garbaccio, who currently acts as managing director, aircraft and engine acquisitions at Fortress Transportation and Infrastructure. Hey, Thomas. So before we jump into some of the interesting career paths that each of you had experienced before arriving at these current positions, I'd like to start back kind of at the very beginning. Well, some viewers may or may not know about both of you is that you were both born into aviation families insofar as you both have parents and siblings who have significant roles within our industry. I also kind of grew up with this same experience, having a father in the industry, yet my brothers wanted nothing to do with it. What is it about aviation that was so attractive to you growing up that led you to join this crazy industry rather than run away from it like others might? Jeff, I'll start with you on that.
Yeah, so like you said, hi, everybody. So my father was a senior executive in a couple of airlines in the United States before he retired. And since I was a little kid, I was interested in aircraft. I knew about fleets. I knew what airlines were flying what aircraft. And obviously, as a son of an airline guy, we traveled all over the world since I was very, very young and lived internationally. And so I was exposed to travel and exposed to airlines and hanging around airports from a very small child. And it stuck. When I got out of high school, I basically decided that's what I wanted to do. So I started working for the airlines when I was 19 years old. And I worked in various positions of operations and ended up getting into the finance department of an airline as a junior accountant. And that led me to begin understanding the financial aspects of airlines, aircraft leasing, all that kind of stuff. And then when I was working for the airlines, it was an airline called Flying Tiger Line back in 1981. There was a guy there that I met, and basically he gave me the best piece of advice that I got. And he said, 1981, I was 22 years old. He said, get out of the operating business, get into leasing. And, 1981 was early days in leasing. I mean, ILFC had started in 1973. So they were really the guys who were beginning to institutionalize the leasing business. Still wasn't institutionalized. But the guy who told me that was a guy named Sam Fondler. He was one of the founders of Tower Air. And he was the one that introduced me. The other guy that was instrumental in my getting into the aircraft leasing business was a guy named Dick Doust. And Dick Doust was one of the founders with Rich Wiley and Greg Harding Brown of Pegasus years ago. Dick retired many years ago, and Sam, we lost Sam. He was very old. But those are the two guys that really got me into it. And once I understood the leasing business, I joined a company called United Aviation Services, which was owned by a gentleman by the name Safwan Kuzbari, who we all know from Novus. And Safwan became one of the preeminent aircraft traders in the 1980s and still is involved in it. And those were the real big impressions upon me, in addition to other traders, which I can talk about later if you want.
Yeah, so it seems like once you initially had your first job in aviation in the airlines, you never wanted to leave. Do you ever see yourself leaving this industry?
No, I mean, I'm at I'm in towards the end of it, but no, I don't. I mean, I've had a great run in this business, and been trading on my own now. This is my fourth cycle. Fourth aircraft value cycle that I'm involved in, and so I'm very comfortable in it, and I understand the signs of the cycles. But a lot of it was the wax on, wax off period that I spent from when I got into the airlines until I started my first company in 1989. I mean, that was the best thing for me is learning about the business. You mentioned it before, and one of the things that I did in 1985 is I joined PK Air Finance, and I worked there for 4 years. And what that did is that exposed me to the financial side of the aircraft leasing and trading component, which has been invaluable to me, not only for the contacts that I made, but also for the things that I learned being in the bank. So my toolbox coming into aircraft trading and leasing included operations, it included aircraft leasing, it included finance. So when I started my company, my first company in 1989, I mean, I felt pretty comfortable. I made some big mistakes, which I think is also part of the polishing process during my time. But all in all, it's been great. I wouldn't see myself doing anything else.
Yeah, and something important that you mentioned was kind of the cyclical nature, and that's something that we'll talk about a little later in this. But Thomas, I also wanted to get to you because you've also grown up with a rich heritage in aviation, and I know that you also attended Embry-Riddle for both undergrad and for your MBA. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you grew up in this industry as well? Thomas, are you on mute? I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was on mute. Okay. Yeah, I've got a similar background to Jeb. Actually, my parents met at flight school, and I was born like 2 years later. My dad was, a founder of numerous airlines in France and Africa and the Middle East. So I was always involved with him from a young age, especially after the age of 16. I really started working with him a lot. And then, I was in boarding school in the UK. I was looking for a good aviation school, pushed me to come to the US, found Embry-Riddle, was a great aeronautical school, and every summer I would work with him at the airline. So I worked in crew scheduling, operations, ACMI contracts, finance, all that great stuff, and I got to learn a lot about the advantage of being an airline and also the disadvantage of being an airline. After school, I started going on my own too, a bit like Jeb, working in the spare part business. I always find it very interesting, so I started trading components and LRUs and, graduated to landing gears and then went to engine. Then I finally got my chance with an aircraft lessor. With a small lessor at the time, it was called Apollo Aviation, which became Carlyle Partners, and Robert Korn had one aircraft on lease to my father, so I decided to go and work with him, which was a great school, great mentor. I learned a lot from him, and then, spent a couple of years with Robert and Bill, which was very good for my career. And then I went back to Europe, helped my dad sell the airline because I told him, you need to get out of this business right now before it's too late. And I came back to the U.S. I missed the U.S. after a couple of years in Europe. And then I went to work for another spare part company. And then this financial crisis happened, 2008, 2009. So it was very difficult to lease aircraft. So I started focusing on engines and got great knowledge. I built the company. I built my knowledge for about 2-3 years with that company. And then I moved to Fortress and started creating my own portfolio.
Well, it's good to hear that you missed us in the US and you wanted to come back. So that's nice. But I know that you and Jep also know each other really well. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys got to know each other?
You want me to start?
Yeah.
Well,
Either one of you.
Well, Thomas and I were.
Depends which story you want to tell.
Well,
yeah,
we were moving in the same kind of social circle in Miami. We didn't actually meet in aviation. We really met through other people, and then once we met each other in the nightclubs in South Beach, we came to understand that our backgrounds were very similar, and we've got to be very good friends, and we're over 20 years now. And I mean, the funny story was that Thomas thought my daughter was my girlfriend, so I thought that was a pretty good way to break the ice. But in any event, yeah, I've been following Thomas's career all throughout, and just watching him. And one of the reasons that I thought it was a good example to bring forward in this venue was his progress through the industry to the point is where now he's trading at a very high level, fairly early on in his career. I mean, so I think that it's a good example of the things to do, the tools to use, and the way to operate. And we'll talk about some of those other things later on.
Definitely. And mentorship is something that's, really important. And I think underrated in our industry is having that mentorship. And also if you're on the mentor side, taking the time out of your day to help with mentorship and people's careers. And you kind of talked a little bit about career progression and Thomas's, but both of you have had various different types of careers and different aspects of the industry. And for, our viewers who have kind of 1 to 10 years of experience in the industry, sometimes it's difficult, if not impossible, at the beginning of your career to envision the kind of twists and turns and the paths that it'll take to end up at these great positions that you both have now. I'd like for you both to talk about a little bit about kind of the challenges or the benefits that you had having these different careers. Myself, I started out, over at AAR in aviation finance. I then went into aviation journalism, living abroad in India. And then I went into bankruptcy and now transactional legal. Similarly, you guys also, like you mentioned, Jeff, a little bit, you have the lending background. And then you also had various different aspects in there. So can you talk a little bit about how learning a wide variety about the different fields of aviation has helped you, and maybe kind of the path that led you to know and bring you where you are today?
Well, if you go back into the 80s, the guys who were the big aircraft traders back in the 80s, guys like Gunnar Bjorg, guys like Bob Wagenfeld, Safwan Kuzbari was one. I mean, there are guys who are no longer in the industry. Jim Dollins was big for a while. I mean, his background was that he was a sales guy at Boeing, and he transitioned into the private sector, or I shouldn't say the private sector, but on his own independently. But these were the guys, and Michael Goldberg, who's now still my partner in this business. I mean, these were the guys that were the big aircraft traders back in the 80s. George Batchelor obviously was one. As I mentioned, Steve Haase back in ILFC, I mean, they were key because, I mean, he clearly was the father of this industry, the institutional part of aircraft leasing. Tony Ryan obviously had a huge impact by starting GPA, which has now morphed into GCAS. And what happened is that as the industry started getting more developed, more really in the 90s, when GPA imploded, what that did, it took a ton of talent that was based in Ireland and it just shot it all over the place. The Slattery brothers are the best example of that. You look at a lot of guys who are in the industry today. I mean, their lineage goes back to one of those big companies, and the ILFC and GCAS and /GPA. And way of thinking was that I really wanted to be independent. Now, one of the things that I've said many times is that, and I've said this for 20, 25 years, is that my children won't be in the aviation industry. And as it turns out, they're not. My son's an architect and my daughter works for a snowboard company. And the reason I said that is because of the commoditization of aircraft. And that's what we've seen. The aircraft are really a commodity. You look at all the ABS activity and how the aircraft are traded when they're on lease. I think one common thing about Thomas and I, and this is a heritage from those older aircraft, those legacy aircraft traders, is most of the deals that we do aren't with leases. Most of the aircraft that we buy are not attached to leases. And so we create the economics of the transaction ourselves by having this diverse toolbox or this diverse knowledge subset of knowing what's required, what kind of engines are required, what kind of aircraft are required, and then you can put the transaction together. The challenge on the commoditization side is that what happens is the economics are baked into the deal. Everybody knows what all the factors of the transaction are. And so you're really talking about basis points. Where you create the economics by yourself, that's where you can really create some good returns. And I know that, Thomas is an example of that and how he operates in Fortress. But the key is, and we're going to get to it, one of the things is networking that I know we're going to bring up. But Thomas, maybe you can talk to it.
Yeah, I mean, you bring a good point. I guess early in my career, I started focusing on why are assets worth this much or this much, right? And it's all about learning the maintenance and the price of a landing gear or thrust reversers or engines. And what I quickly find out over time is as an aircraft gets older, most of the value becomes engines. So I became, over the time, an expert in engine and knowing how to value them, which is quite a difficult task when you're brand new at it. And that's where with Jeb we really connected, because I believe, in every aircraft type or engine types, you've got a certain ecosystem. For example, Jeb has been focusing on the 757 in the last cycle and it's done very well because he knows all the people at the airlines which, are leasing or selling these aircraft. So that's kind of the ecosystem. And once you understand the sellers and the buyers, you plug in the middle and you try to make a deal happen. And to Jeb's point, we always buy aircraft together when they are on ground. So we only pay for the metal and we don't pay for the cash flow. And the cash flow, we create it together. And that's how we make very successful transactions happen over time. So I guess that's the gist of it.
Yeah, Thomas, I thought it was a good point that you mentioned about understanding the sellers and the buyers, and that can really help you to become successful in the aircraft trading and leasing business. And I'm seeing some of the questions that are coming in, and having that background that you have, particularly yours with the airlines, how did you make the jump from kind of airlines into the trading and leasing side of the industry? Because they sometimes can be, a little vastly different. But if you're a student or you're somebody younger in your career working at an airline who kind of wants to get into a role of aircraft trading and leasing, what kind of path did you take and what advice do you have for younger people who might be looking to get into that type of role?
Yeah, so from a young age, I remember working with my dad, and whenever he would sign, the transfer forms, there was a certain amount of dollars. And the bigger dollar ones, I was like, who is this to? And he goes, oh, that's the aircraft lessor. And I go, oh, that's who I want to be, because you work every weekend, every holiday, and you seem to send all the money to those guys. So that's how I got interested more on the leasing side, to become an owner of the aircraft.
That's a good point.
That was my transition.
That's a good point. And one of the other things that we kind of touched on a little bit is both of you kind of mentioned the cyclical nature of our aviation industry. We kind of operate in these 10-year cycles. And obviously we're sort of in one of the downturns of the cycle right now, as the current pandemic tends to have some disastrous effects upon our industry. Prior to that, we can look back and Thomas, you mentioned a little bit about the 2008, 2009. And before that, we had, the aftermath of September 11th. Which brought about its own downturn. Given your perseverance through these past downturns that both of you have lived through and experienced in your careers, what are your thoughts on the current kind of state of where we're at now And what are your thoughts on sort of some of the potential roads to recovery and what that might look like? I'll leave it to either one of you to jump in to take that one. It's a loaded question.
I'll start. You know, like I said before, I mean, this is my fourth cycle coming up on my own. One thing I can say is more things change, the more they stay the same. I mean, if you're paying attention, there are always signs. I mean, I remember one time being at the Geneva conference back in the days when we used to have the Geneva conference. And that was about the time in 1989 when ILFC sold to AIG. And I remember Bill Cumberledge saying in a cocktail environment, saying, that's it, market's over. And sure enough, a year later it was. And so in every single cycle, you see these signs, and if you're paying attention, you can begin strategically investing based on the signs that you see. One of the things that I've detected in every single cycle is when things are bad, there's a number of people who believe that this is it. It's a fundamental structural change in the industry, and it's always going to be bad. And it's the same thing happens when the market's frothy. You know, all these people are always talking about, oh, it's a fundamental change. There's tons of liquidity. This is different. You know, I think somebody at Boeing called the cycle back in 2005 and 6 the super cycle. We're not going to have any more, you know, big changes in values because you know, things have gotten more efficient. And it just doesn't happen. You have corrections like you had in 2008 and 2000, and now you had one in 2020. I can tell you how many conversations I had in 2019 with people at ISTAT conferences.
You've definitely told me too. You've said it's coming, it's coming. But what would you say to people who say that now is a fundamental change?
Well, it's not. We're going to have it's not. We're going to have a recovery. We will have a recovery. It's going to happen, and it's going to, and you know, the actual hard part of the firm part of the recovery is going to be in the second half of this decade. It is going to take a while to sort this all out. And I think the bloodletting is not over. I think we're going to see some serious issues in airlines and maybe even some leasing companies who are going to have a hard time between now and then. But we will get out of this, and the world will get back to traveling, and it will recover. I don't see that. You know, I think people are talking 23, 24, different people, but in that range, I mean, it will happen. And so you have to really understand where you are from time to time in the life cycle, in the term of that cycle. And just like we had a correction in 2020, we're going to have another one around 2030. And you can almost plan this, because since 1973, when the first cycle that impacted the jet aircraft business, it's been 10 years, like you said. So
I'll have to put that in my calendar then. Plan for that.
You should. I mean, yeah.
But Thomas, what are your thoughts kind of on the cycles? You sort of mentioned, you know, you were younger in your career in 2008, 2009. Like, kind of, how did that affect you? How did you get over that and in your career? And then how are you working with the pandemic now, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Jeb, I would say, you know, every crisis is slightly different. Actually, I graduated in 2002 early, just after September 11, and there was no jobs available, so I decided to do my MBA straight away. And then, you know, I started in the business, and I was fine. But my first real crisis where I could understand the mechanics or the pushes in the market was 2008, 2009. And you saw a lot of airlines just parking aircraft because there was no financing available. And then after 2009, you know, things kind of changed. You know, there's a lot of new players that came to the industry. The Asian lessors started becoming quite big. So that was kind of a different era. The last 10 years was very different. It became more of a crowded place. And back in the mid-2000s, you'll see a lessor doing brand new aircraft or older aircraft. Now people seem to be a little bit more focused because there's more players in the market. I think this pandemic is very, very different than what we've experienced in the past, just for the simple reason that it's a global pandemic. Everybody's affected, you know, it's changed everybody's life, everybody's aware of it, so it's a very complex thing. To Jeb's point, I don't think, you know, the bleeding is over yet. I see domestic airlines coming back quicker on international travel, I think, the countries need to get together to create a procedure of how people are going to travel in the future. So I think you need to adjust for the type of crisis. Every time is very different. Like after 2009, you would think, freighter market would come back straight away, and it didn't. Freighter market was in the tank for quite a long time, and Jeb and I were actually buying quite a few freighter airplanes at the time. So, you just got to look at what's the opportunity in that specific market.
Yeah, and I know that, Fortress, you guys have what over 300 assets, correct? Or I know you guys have a lot in your portfolio. What have you seen in kind of the trading market going on, and what kind of do you see as the road to recovery? What do you think that will look like? Some people say, like Jet mentioned, some people were saying, oh, this could take years to get over, or are people going to start jumping right back into it? What's kind of your thoughts on that and strategy?
Yeah. I think it's going to take a while. What we've learned through this pandemic ourselves, and we're still learning, we talk about what we need to adjust internally and what we could do better. But we were very glad to have a quite good exposure to cargo. I mean, 30% of our portfolio is exposed to cargo, which has been killing it this year. So given the passenger market, which was really affected, there was a really good effect on the portfolio. So what we've learned is have a well-balanced portfolio, and the international markets are the one which are the mostly impacted. I mean, if you look at 777 or A330 values, they are truly, truly affected, and I think that's going to take a while before it comes back. The recovery itself is just really depends on how the world reopens up with this vaccine and when people start traveling again, and you see numbers ticking up. But I would say the world is more global than ever. People live in different countries away from their families, so they always need to travel nowadays. And I've yet to meet somebody that's been on holiday and say, oh, I had to fly to go on holiday. I would never go on holiday again. So I think it's going to come back.
That's good. And that is encouraging to hear. And sort of keeping on this topic of the road to recovery, given our audience of rising executives, what are some specific advice or guidance that you can offer to younger people in our industry as we sort of transition into this, new normal, as so many people are calling it? What are ways specifically that rising executives or more junior people in companies can serve as assets to those companies and within our industry sort of to contribute to that recovery? What advice would you have to younger people as they're also traversing through this? I don't know, Jeff, if you wanted to start with this one. I
mean, talking to a lot of my friends who still have a lot of aircraft out there, I think we're still in the whack-a-mole phase. I mean, you show up on Monday morning and you have 500 emails of, I don't want to pay my rent today. I mean, it's really just a matter of staying ahead of the curve and trying to be creative on maintaining value and maintaining relationships. And, it's a real challenge right now. I think, one of the things that happened to me years ago when I first started my first company, I was actually having lunch with George Batchelor, and the market was recovering, and I was talking about, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and I'm going to do this, and I was very excited, and George looked at the guy we were having lunch with and said, Jeff's going to be a good aircraft trader, he just needs one bad deal. And this is that bad deal. I mean, a lot of the young people that are going through this COVID thing are now creating an experience base which is going to serve them well if they stay in this industry for the next 15, 20, 30 years, because they will then see how the industry recovers. They will also see the next downturn. And once you go through one or two of these, you cease to become too concerned about it. You more or less expect it. Say, okay, now we're in this and this is going to happen. And then when that happens, we expect this. And it just goes on and on. And so this process that they're going through now, I think, is just watch and learn. And the other comment that I will make is that what happens in this time is because it's a little bit turbulent. People are losing their jobs, or there's transition, there's turnover. That, as the recovery takes hold, that creates opportunities for people to get into positions, different positions that they might not have gotten into when the market was frothy before the correction. So I think if people are paying attention, I think they can find themselves some decent opportunities in this transition into the recovery period.
No, and that's good to know. And one of the things also, one of the questions that popped up is sort of a question to the obvious, and was something Thomas touched on too, is that after every downturn, we kind of learn something as an industry after that happened. And one of the questions that came up seems obvious, is, well, if we know that, and we can plan on our calendars that every 10 years there's going to be a downturn, why don't we do something to prevent this? You know, Jeff, do you see any way to prevent this, or is this just something that happens? It's just bound to happen?
No, I mean, look, for me, I mean, I'm a private aircraft trader. I buy for my own account, and so I can make these, and I don't have a big operation, so I don't have, you know, offices all over the world and people. We're a very small operation. The way that we've dealt with it in my career, I mean, in the cycle of the 90s, I sold my company in 97. The correction came in 2001. Started another company with my brother, and that we decided, because we saw the signs that things were getting frothy, we liquidated our 36 aircraft portfolio in 2007. The cycle, the correction hit in 2008. Thomas alluded to the fact that I've been playing in 757s in this last cycle. We liquidated all of our 757s, but all of them actually in 2018-19. And simply because I saw the signs and the values were good, and you don't go broke making a profit. And we liquidated everything. Right now, we own one aircraft. We actually own two aircraft right now. You know, we're now preparing for this next ramp up. But for us, it's a white piece of paper. So in a way, you know, we've done that. It's much more difficult to do that if you have an institutional setting, because you have a rolling company, then you have to feed the beast, and you have to maintain some kind of continuation, and that's where the challenges come in this kind of situation. So,
yeah, Thomas, and what are your thoughts on that, and also on kind of the advice that we can offer to younger people in our industry as kind of serving as part of this recovery within these various companies?
Yeah, I mean, two things I always concentrated on myself is networking and knowledge. I mean, these are two things nobody can take away from you. Aircraft, they come, they go, you know, but network, you know, usually stays. So I spend a lot of time, you know, getting to know the guys at the airlines. And as the time goes on, you know, this relationship becomes more tight. As you know people better, and you've seen them over the years, you've seen them grow. I would say also, you know, with the ISTAT community, try to make friends with people your age, people in the same situation as you. You know, they might be a VP today, and, you know, in 5 years from now, they might be head of trading. So these are the kind of like important relationship you wanna culture over time. And then knowledge, you know what you're talking about, because there's a lot of guys out there that really know their stuff, and you want to know more than them. So that would be the two advice that I would give: network and knowledge.
Yeah, and given that this speaker series is part of ISTAT's one of the key platforms for networking within our industry, I did want to talk a little bit about networking, business development. Both you and Jeff have undeniable presence within our industry. You know, people know you at any of the events that are thrown. You know, Jeff, you've lived and worked all over the world. You're the front man for our ISTAT band. You've been the ISTAT president and our ISTAT Foundation president. And you also just can't be missed in your colorful, bright suits. Thomas, you've also lived and worked all over the world. You have your connections also at Embry-Riddle via undergrad and graduate. You probably have more friends than I'll ever have. What advice do you have for rising executives who are looking to network, specifically with an eye toward, you know, knowing that it's difficult right now, you know, that we're not at conferences, and sometimes younger people in the industry don't necessarily have the opportunity to go to conferences, given this new Zoom normal, so to say. You know, how has networking evolved, and what advice do you have on that front?
Well, I can't stress more enough about the importance of ISTAT. I mean, it has been instrumental. You know, Jeff Niddle talked about it when he got the ISTAT award, about how important the ISTAT Foundation, or the ISTAT, was to his career. And all the guys that I've grown up with, I mean, you know, to Thomas's point about these guys who were, you know, friends when we were young, who have grown into, you know, big jobs. I mean, I grew up with Jeff Niddle, and I grew up with Tony Diaz, and you know, all those guys, your father, you know, and we all grew up together. We were young, and we were going to the conferences since ISTAT started in 1983. And the networking opportunities that ISTAT provided all through the years, and it's grown now exponentially, has just been a huge part of the toolbox that we use in order to develop our careers. Now, the way it is, and one thing that ISTAT has done, as you well know, is that we're focusing on younger people, helping younger people. We started ISTAT U, which allows younger people to become educated in the nuances of our industry. We've started this forum, which is fantastic for young people. And I think the one thing that you bring up is that people aren't able to go to the conferences a lot. And before COVID, one of the problems is a lot of young people weren't allowed in their organizations to go because they just weren't sending that level of people in. But now with this online presence, I think this online networking presence will not stop once COVID goes away. I think this is an established pillar of ISTAT offering that is going to continue. And this is going to be an opportunity for young people to take advantage of and network through the digital resources that ISTAT is providing and will be providing ongoing.
Yeah, and I think you also mentioned something earlier about, you know, we should have ISTAT TV, get that set up.
Yeah, I think, you know, see what Jerry and Dean do.
Yeah, we'll see. Thomas, what are your thoughts on that and networking, and how are you keeping your vast network together, you know, given that we can't, you know, travel as much as we used to?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a little bit more complex. Luckily, you know, when I joined ISTAT, it was 1998, and it was small enough where I knew the entire room at the time. Now it's become very, very big, and I try to make an effort to always introduce myself to the people I don't know, just to grow my network. So I would say when you go to those conferences, make the most of it, you know, go and maybe not shake hands nowadays, but go and introduce yourself with people and let them know what you do and ask them what they do, and then make a mental note of that. That way you understand what ecosystem they're working in, and whenever you find a deal, you know the people which, you know, might be willing to buy that deal or sell that deal. So I would say just put your name out there, always, you know, come with a full stack of business cards and give as many as you can out and grow your network. Now, you know, with this pandemic, hopefully, you know, it'll be over soon. We'll all get back together and we get back to a normal. There's nothing like meeting in person. Well, I would say too, you know, if you've got a smaller network and you're just starting out, reach out to the people you've met, you know, and talk about what you're doing right now and ask them what they're up to right now and see if there's a deal you can put together. So that's what I would do right now.
Yeah, and definitely one of the things you mentioned earlier is incredibly important. Like getting to know people your age is also something that's important, because, you know, now you might be junior, but then, you know, give it a couple years and then all of a sudden your close friend becomes the head of aircraft trading somewhere, which happens very frequently. And I've seen that happen, you know, in my career as well. One of the questions that came up on this topic of networking is, you know, in the same way that networking is becoming more digital and we're having more meetings over Zoom and we're having more events like this over Zoom and different things, do you think the ability to do business will also kind of trend more towards digital? Once we're able to travel again, will people still be traveling to do business, or will people do you think people might just settle into just doing deals digitally?
I think people will still do it. Will still travel and go and meet people. I mean, when you're doing sizable deals, like let's say 5 million, 10 million, 100 million, you have to go and meet the people and understand who you're dealing with exactly. So I think that will never go away. Obviously, people now with apps like Zoom, it's very efficient to kind of get online, do a first introduction call, but there's nothing like meeting in person and breaking bread together.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And I think I already know what Jep's answer is going to be to that. But I know, Jep, you mentioned previously that you're more of the old school mentality in wanting to meet people. So thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I mean, you got to get out there. I mean, there's no question. You have to get out there and meet people. I mean, obviously the tools that we have now are very good to have in this environment. But going like Thomas said, I mean, breaking bread, and it's not about the sitting in the conference room. It's really more about having a cocktail afterwards and maybe going to a concert or going to a sports event, or just becoming friends. And I think that's another aspect of this, is like, the people that I've grown up with in this industry are my closest friends. There are guys who I might not see for a long time, many years, and when I see them, it's like I saw them last Friday. It's you develop a very, very close connection with the people that you do business with in this industry, and that doesn't diminish even with the passage of time. So
yeah, definitely. And
yeah,
go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree, and it's part of our job, right? What we love about it is, we're able to travel worldwide, meet different culture, different people, understand the process. In each different culture is different. So that's what I love about aircraft trading. You get exposed to all those different things, which, you don't really get exposed when you stay in your office or in your conference room.
Yeah, definitely. And ISTAT definitely has that platform that allows people to get together and meet. I guess just shameless plug for ISTAT there. But we're sort of going to start switching into some question and answers. So I just want to remind everybody who's viewing, to please submit questions that you have. I have seen a couple questions that were coming in, and there's one specific that came in for Thomas that I'm going to ask, which was, Thomas, you mentioned a little bit earlier when a lot of the questions here have been talking about the downturn, and I get that because that's obviously top of mind for everybody here, especially our rising executives. So Thomas, you were talking a little bit about freighter exposure earlier, and one of the questions that came in was, on the 30% freighter exposure in Fortress that you mentioned, was this a defined strategy that you had as a firm, or was to hedge the type of passenger downturn that you potentially saw coming in the next cycle? Or do you think that luck has any element to do with it?
No, I mean, I wouldn't say it was an edge position at all. Actually, we just found some very good aircraft at the right price. So that's why we bought this freighter 747. I believe they were completely undervalued, and there's no real replacement around that price range. Also, being involved in the engine leasing, we can play a big part on the engine maintenance and replacement of these aircraft. So we can make, extra yield by managing the engines for the airline. So that's why we have freighter airplanes, just because we can do a lot of things with the engines, and we bought them at the right price at the time.
And Jeff, similarly for you, as your company, Aerolease, has been navigating, the downturn, strategic or luck? What do you think?
I mean, I saw, the values were up. Like I said, you don't go broke making a profit. We made it. I believed there was going to be a correction, even though everybody laughed at me. Didn't know what it was going to be. I mean, one of the things about corrections that you got to remember is it's always something different. I mean, it's in 73, it was oil. In 82, it was interest rates and inflation. In 90, it was Iraq. In 2001, it was 9/11. 2008 was a financial crisis. And now we have COVID. I mean, all different kind of reasons why this happened. One of the things Thomas alluded to is this one is different in that in all the other, in the last two, in 2001 and in 2008, it didn't impact the actual physical flying of aircraft. You could still fly and go to Hawaii or do whatever. Now, it shut down the industry, and that is something that is revolutionary actually in our industry, and how that is going to impact is going to be interesting. The other aspect of this recovery that's interesting is that between the MAX and COVID, it interrupted the production of aircraft. We've never had an interruption in the production of aircraft, even in 2001 or 2008. They continued producing aircraft, and there was no break in the supply chain. When you break the supply chain through production interruptions like this, it has ramifications that sometimes take a long time to sort out. And I don't think we're going to see the levels of production back from the OEMs for many years until they get back to the 2019 levels. And the question is, what is that going to do to the supply demand formulas, especially in the latter half of this next cycle? But for us, I mean, as I said before, it was an easy deal. I mean, we knew what we wanted. We felt it was happening. We liquidated, and then it happened. And now we're planning our next conquest, if you will. I will also say, though, I think I alluded to it before, it's more difficult now to be an old school aircraft trader like I am in this environment of institutional aircraft investment. It's still possible. It's harder to do for young people. Because one of the things you need is a lot of capital. I mean, you can go out and maybe you could raise money, or you could find somebody to support you or something like that, which is essentially what I did. But back when I was buying aircraft, I was buying them for $2, $3, $4 million. Now you're talking about 15 million, 20, $30 million, and so it's a much bigger capital proposition, and it's much more difficult to do independently, like I do it.
Do you see the capital drying up because of the current pandemic?
Well, if they're all shorting GameStop, then obviously it's going to dry up. No, I mean, look, these things go in waves, and we'll see what happens. I mean, there are a number of markets right now that I think are bubbles, and I don't think I'm the only one having that view. So we'll see what happens. But when you have these bubbles pop in these big silos, that's what creates the lack of liquidity. And it's not a matter of lack of liquidity. It's a matter of liquidity that's willing to be invested. The other thing, obviously, is interest rates. When interest rates are so low, people are just looking for anything to get a better return. And aircraft obviously is that asset class. And that's why you see a lot of capital coming into the space. So if we see inflation, which should happen mathematically just because of the amount of cash that's been put into the economy, and then interest rates go up, then we'll see what happens, But
yeah, and so we talked a little bit about, capital, but another question that came up along that same, line of reasoning is, considering the downturn of travel, what would the future of fuel hedging kind of look like in the recovery? Yeah. Either one of you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, fuel is a big component of the whole industry, right? And if fuel goes up by quite a lot, it's just going to be a very dramatic outcome for the airline. They just piled on a lot of debt, and then, you're going to add even more cost to them. So I think, fuel needs to remain about the same level as today, otherwise the recovery would take much longer. And then, if fuel goes up, let's say to $100 a barrel, and interest rate goes up, then it's going to be a very, very difficult time for the whole ecosystem, for the lessors, for the airlines, for the manufacturers, for the MROs. So I think, these are the external forces of the business that nobody can control. Yeah. Always keep an eye on that.
Yeah. Jeff, did you have any thoughts on that?
No, obviously fuel is something. I will say also, though, that there are two aspects of the industry that are very interesting. And number one is the new engine technology. I mean, if you take the GTF engine, obviously it's got, teething pains with the Airbus and all that, but, Pratt & Whitney will fix that motor. And once that motor is reliable, I mean, you're talking huge percentage of savings, and I think that's gonna be really, really good down the line. The second one is electric. I mean, it's not going to be in my career, in my lifetime, but down the road for young people, if you're in your 20s, I mean, there's a real possibility you could have a electric or hydrogen powered aircraft down the road. And so it's going to create different areas of investment opportunity that, weren't available in my career, only because I was in a career where it's just about oil. So those are two, things that were observations that we have.
Yeah, definitely. And along those similar lines, thoughts on kind of the green movement in aircraft. Do we think that this will take off, so to say, or that there'll be an uptake in this in the future, or just kind of a fad to tick ESG boxes? Thomas, I mean, do you think that we'll be seeing green aircraft as being a part of the portfolio, or more electric aircraft as part of the Fortress portfolio in the future? Could you see that happening?
Yeah, I think it's going to take a while before they certify such an aircraft, but we're definitely keeping an eye on the new technologies coming out. I think the most important thing right now is how do you transport mass amount of people safely? I mean, COVID spread so quickly because people just traveled and got it on the airplane and went to a country and spread it without their knowledge. So I think, the airlines need to concentrate on the way to sterilize the cabins and while saving fuel. I mean, they need to make more fuel-efficient airplanes. I think the electric aircraft will come out at some point, or the hydrogen aircraft will come out at some point. But until you see such technology being used on the military side, it won't get used on the commercial side until then. So
I think green, Kristen, green commitment really is going to come down to the politics of the countries. Obviously, in Europe, it's a much more visible political thing than it is in the U.S., at least until recently. And ultimately, if the governments are committed to the green protection or green situation, the industries will follow it, but it will only happen if it's an overall commitment by politicians.
Yeah, I mean, there will definitely be a lot of bureaucratic red tape in that, and even with even as we look with drone certification, as our next step, that's coming along super slowly. So, like you mentioned, there is always going to be red tape with that, and hopefully we'll see it within our careers in the hopefully near future. Interesting topic. But there's another question that came up that kind of ties that I like. It ties back to kind of the beginning of our discussion when we were talking about your career paths and just the vast amount of experience that you guys have amassed over the years. Is there anything about your career that you wish you could change? Obviously, hindsight is 20/20. Is there anything that if you could do it over, you'd change?
Yeah, I wouldn't buy a bunch of airplanes in 1990. I mean, I bought four, my first deal was I bought 4 DC-9s in 1990 on lease to Midway Airlines, and I sold one of them for a nice profit. And then I thought I was the king of the world, and then the crash happened. And now, and I will say that experience was very important for me because that set the tone for how I was going to look at my portfolio in the next up cycle. The problem I had I started my company in September of '89, and a lot of people were coming up to me and saying, "What are you, crazy? Why are you starting an aircraft lease trading company in '89?" And they were right. And I think my answer at the time was, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So whether I start it in '89 or '94 or whatever, it would have been better to wait the 5 years and start it in '94, but I didn't. And so if I had one thing that I would do differently is I would probably started trading later. Although I did some good trades in the early '90s, 727-100 freighters and things like that. But at the end of the day, timing is everything.
Yeah. Thomas, what about you? Is there anything that you wish you could change?
Which I would have done differently? No, I think, it takes a while before you can build up your network and your knowledge. And then I think, every good opportunities come at a difficult time. Just need to know when to seize it. I'm still quite young. I've still got a few years to go, and we've got a big business plan to accomplish with my team. So we've got 10 good years left to build it to where we need to build it. And basically, our goal is to provide the lowest cost per cycle on the engine leasing to each one of the airlines out there, and become the best at what we do while benefiting the airline.
Yeah.
I think Kristen, one thing I'll bring up is one common thing with Thomas and I just dawned on me was in my career, I started in 1978 and I started I went on my own in 1989. Thomas came into got into ISTAT in 1998, and he started trading on his own with Fortress in 2013, 12? What was it, Thomas?
Yeah, 2012, yes.
2012. So it was for both of us, it was 10, 12 years of wax on, wax off. And I think one of the pieces of advice that I have for young people is try to expose yourself to as many different aspects of the industry. If you want to stay in the industry for your entire career, try to stay, be focused on that aspect. My brother is a perfect example of that. My brother, in the early part of his career, focused on the technical side. And so on the technical side, my brother is super knowledgeable, way more knowledgeable than I am. I've got to go hire technical guys, but my brother has a very, very deep knowledge of the technical side. That's the part of the toolbox that he built early on in his career. And so I think during that period of time in the beginning of your career, let's say the first 10, 15 years of your career before you go and do something bigger, is just get as much experience in as many different areas of the industry as you can.
Yeah, and I do think these ISTAT learning labs that have been going on are also helpful in that, giving a little bit of insight into those different things. I started in bankruptcy on how, kind of transactions and deals fall apart and are taken apart and sold apart, into then going into the legal side of how transactions are put together and closed. And having, that roundabout experience of everything is really helpful. So I agree with you that, for younger people, having a wide variety of, experiences in the industry is really helpful to developing kind of an overall platform for your knowledge base. And let's see, I think one of the last questions I kind of wanted to ask was talking about kind of learning from mistakes. One of the questions was, was there something that you learned from? Do you want to admit to a mistake that you learned from, or that has helped kind of shape your worldview and career? Or no mistakes?
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean,
I can take this one. Yeah, I would say, the biggest mistakes you can make is when you do something and you're not exactly knowledgeable or sure what you're doing, and it's going to end up costing quite a lot of money. So that's why knowledge is key, and understanding what things cost and the logistics of aviation is very costly and time consuming. So you need to understand what you're buying and who you're going to sell it to or lease it to, and how this is going to happen. So map out your steps and, do it correctly. For example, with Jeb, I know he's a professional, right? So he called me back in December 15th and he goes, "Hey, have you seen that 757? I go, "Yeah, I've been working on it." He goes, "Oh, do you want to do a deal on it? I just want, to do an engine and the airframe." I go, "Okay, fine, I'll do the other engine." And we ended up doing the deal within 5 days, basically, signed and closed. And, Jeb did his thing, I did my thing with the other stuff, and, the deal was done. And that's just pure knowledge, knowing what we're looking at and what we're stepping into at that point.
And also experience and relationship. I mean, Thomas and I have known each other for so long, and I know all the other guys in Thomas's gang. So, it was easy. Look, mine was the Midway deal. Obviously, I bought airplanes in 1990, and your dad just texted me and reminded me that when I was in Chicago, and Al Altschul, the CFO of Midway, told me that they were going to file bankruptcy the next day. So went to Midway Airport, the old Midway Airport, when it was just the old building. And your dad came to see me. I was there with Jim Wiffler. And your dad came to see us, and we basically bought the bottle of vodka from the bar. Just give us the bottle, we'll pay for the whole thing. And we, Jim and I proceeded, because he was the lender on the deal, and we proceeded to finish the bottle of vodka. And your dad had to drive home, which I don't know why we did that, but in any event, that deal was my biggest regret. Yeah.
And well, that's a perfect segue, you know, being a rock star, and just, you know, I wanted to jump into, tell us a little bit about your background. Why are you sitting in a studio, and why do you have, this will be our last question. Why are you sitting in a studio right now? Tell us a little bit about.
I mean, I have a band, and I play I record a lot of music, and this is where I work, actually. Just happens to be where the camera is. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, we hold up, we have a summer home in Vermont where I am right now. And this is where I have a recording studio. And I think, you know, that brings up one of the big factors in this business of ours, is to find an outlet, to find something that you want to do. I know Thomas has found his outlet now in exotic cars and collecting them, and you know, so for me it was music. I mean, I got involved in some other things, auto racing for a while. And that was one of the things that I learned from some of the guys that I met. I mean, a guy like Bob Wagenfeld introduced me to opera. I was in classical music. You know, Mike Goldberg, who's my partner now, at one point was big sailor. He was racing sailboats. You know, one of the great things about aircraft trading is you can make a lot of money. And when you make a lot of money, what do you do with it? You can just sit on the money, or you can enjoy your life and do fun stuff, because at the end of the day, it's all about your memories, you know?
Yeah.
Creating memories.
You're a well-rounded citizen of the world. Well, I'd like to thank you both for being here. I didn't know if there was any closing statement or anything you wanted to say before we kind of wrap up here. Anything else to add? Nope. Well, perfect.
Not from me. Thank you.
Well, I do want to thank both of you for taking the time out of your day to join us for the second installment of the ISTAT Rising Executives program. I would like to encourage everybody viewing to share your feedback on this session. We would definitely be interested in hearing your thoughts. Please reach out to an ISTAT Rising Executives Committee member, or contact ISTAT headquarters with that feedback. Also, just a reminder, a recording from today's session will soon be available on the ISTAT website. And thank you. We look forward to connecting with everyone soon, and have a great day.